Hello and welcome everybody to today's BoF live session. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever it is that you are tuning in from. My name is Diana Lee and I'm the Director of Research and Analysis at the Business of Fashion. I'm based in London and we love to hear from where all of our audience members are coming in from today. So please do feel free to engage with us in the chat and let me know where you're coming in from. So I work specifically for BoF Insights, which some of you may be less familiar with, but essentially Insights is a relatively new team at the Business of Fashion. It is our data unit and it's also our think tank. And so the work that we do is quite distinct from our journalism. Our objective is really to be able to provide our readers and our business and our fashion leaders with the business intelligence that they need to make better strategic decisions. And so you'll find that our reports are much longer in format. They're also much more quantitatively driven. And I hope that many of you will have actually seen some of our prior titles, including the future of fashion resale, the opportunity in digital fashion and avatars, as well as building value and resiliency in fashion supply chain. So I'm absolutely delighted today because we will actually be showing a very short extract from the report that we just launched yesterday, and that will be done by my colleague, Benjamin Schneider. So the report that we just published yesterday is called The New Era in Designer Bags, Redefining Leather Goods. And that is the topic for today's BoF Live. I'm also very honored because we have our two guest panelists with us today. We've got Ian Earnshaw, who is the Global Commercial Director at Mulberry, as well as Richard Johnson, who is the Chief Commercial Officer at Mytheresa. So welcome both. And gentlemen, if you would just please take a minute to introduce yourselves. Ian, if we could please start with you.
Hi, everyone. Diana, firstly, thank you for having me here today. My name is Ian Earnshaw. As Diana rightly said, I'm the Commercial Director at Mulberry. Been there nearly 10 years. My role covers global accountability for all channels and distribution for the Mulberry brand and business.
And Richard, over to you.
Thanks, Diana. Great to be here. As you said, I'm Chief Commercial Officer at Mytheresa. I've been with the business for almost 5 years. A lot has changed in that time. Just for your audience, in case anyone's not familiar, Mytheresa is a global luxury e-commerce platform. We were founded, like many great retailers, in bricks and mortar in Munich back in 1987 and went online in 2006. Of course, we've grown exponentially since then. Today we have a very sharp focus still on high-end luxury, remains our core business. We have the most curated offer of brands and products in the industry. And we focus a lot for our customers on exclusivity. In the last year, we launched more than 48 exclusive capsules, 41 events to celebrate with our customers and our brands. We ship globally. We today have offices in New York, here in London, where I'm calling in from, Milan, Barcelona, and Shanghai, of course, in addition to our Munich HQ. And last January, we listed on the New York Stock Exchange, which for everybody who's seen the growth of this company over the last 5 to 10 years was a great landmark occasion for us. Very happy to be here.
Thank you for both of those introductions. A lot to discuss today and very excited to get into that. But before we crack on, I have a couple of administrative points. So for those of you that are joining us as audience members today, I hope that you will continue to engage with us via the chat function. So in addition to letting us know where you are, we also want to know about your questions for our panelists. However, if you do have questions for our panelists, rather than using the chat function, make sure that you use the Q&A just so that we don't lose sight of your question, because our intention is to actually weave in the audience questions over the course of our moderated conversation. So just remember, panelist questions go into Q&A, and everything else is the chat function. And lastly, if you do encounter any support issues for at any point in time, please just know that our team is standing by, and you can just email us at events@businessofashion.com. So with those points out of the way, I want to direct everybody's attention over to Benjamin Schneider, where he will talk us through the agenda for today.
Perfect. Thank you, Diana. And as Diana mentioned, my name is Benjamin Schneider, and I'm the Senior Research Lead here at BoF Insights. So in terms of our agenda, first, I just want to take you all through a select few of the key findings from our newest report on designer bags and small leather goods. Before then, we're going to turn it over to our panelists for a moderated conversation about everything that's happening in this category. So let's start with a short extract from our report. So the overarching objective of our research and analysis in this report has been to uncover some of the key shifts that are reshaping what, why, and how consumers buy in the designer bags and small leather goods category. Bags and small leather goods, or SLGs for short, is clearly a hero category for designer brands. Not only are bags inherently functional, and they enable us to go about all of our everyday and special occasion activities, but bags also help to convey a sense of belonging, identity, and social status. Now, while our report is ultimately global in scope, we do place a special focus on consumers in both the US and China, as together, these two markets represent over half of global category sales today, and they will continue to drive growth over the next five years, even despite some lingering pandemic-related disruptions. Now, of course, we wish we had time to tell you all of the findings in our report, but since we don't have time for that today, here are just 5 key findings that we're going to highlight quickly now. The first is that designer bags and SLGs are clearly already a hero category, and that status is only set to rise as growth accelerates. The second finding is that designer brands compete on axes of fashion forwardness and pricing, and contemporary brands are now entering the market by occupying white spaces that are left unfilled by heritage brands. Our third finding is that consumer engagement in this category is already very high. Through our proprietary surveys, we found that almost 40% of the general population in the US and 50% in China are engaged in the category. And we've defined being engaged in this category as having purchased a bag or SLG in the past year or intending to purchase one in the next year. Meanwhile, nearly 100% of high net worth individuals, or HNWIs that we surveyed, who have investable assets of between $1.5 and $2 million are also engaged in this category. Our fourth finding is that practical bags, which are defined by durability, and versatility, and functionality above all, reign for everyday use among all engaged consumers. However, some demographics, especially younger generations and HNWIs, do prize brands and products that enable them to clearly communicate their identity, especially for something like a special occasion like a date or a wedding. The fifth finding we'll highlight today is that fast-growing online resale and rental platforms are now offering accessibility and altering how consumers value bags as potential investments. And this really has the opportunity to reshape the category moving forward. So our first finding is that clearly this is a hero category that already contributes disproportionately to brands' top and bottom lines. Brands that currently earn a greater share of sales from bags and SLGs, such as Saint Laurent, use the category as a key tool for customer acquisition. They try to offer something for everyone by having several types of bags at a wide range of price points, and then they encourage customers to try to trade up to higher priced items. Meanwhile, many brands that currently earn a smaller share of total sales from the category, such as Burberry, have recently made it a strategic priority to grow their category sales as of late. And not only to grow revenue and margin, but also in large part to elevate their overall brand positioning, thanks to bags' role as status symbols that can clearly communicate a visual identity. Our second finding to highlight today is that designer bags compete on a spectrum from the most accessible to the most absolute in terms of pricing, as well as from more fashion forward to more classic in terms of designs. And contemporary brands, like those that we've highlighted here in purple, have been staking their claim in the market recently by occupying white spaces that are left unfilled by heritage brands, especially as a lot of heritage brands have tried to elevate their brand by raising prices and moving more towards that absolute category recently. So this competition has not only led to a wider range of options for consumers, but it's also challenged all brands, regardless of their positioning, to try to balance their core portfolios with novelty, with many having the goal of owning a shape, colorway, or other distinct feature in order to stand out in the competition and create strong connections in consumers' minds. Our third finding is that in both the US and China, many consumers from both the general population and the panels of HNWIs that we surveyed are engaged in this category. However, the manner of engagement is quite different. As an example, most general population consumers have a budget of less than $1,000 for a designer bag. Meanwhile, we found that most HNWIs budget over $2,000 for each of their bags, and they're actually highly engaged in this category, which we classify as having both purchased in the past year and intending to purchase in the next year. So our fourth finding is that one area where the general population and HNWI's tastes do converge is in their preference for bags for an everyday or for a regular use. So for everyday bags, both groups of consumers value practical traits over more stylistic or trend-driven ones. However, the story actually flips when it comes to bags for special occasions, at least for the HNWI panel. Our HNWI panel indicated that they choose special occasion bags primarily based on brand and style. But on the other hand, the general population continues to prioritize practical traits for special occasions. This shows that these consumers continue to use the same bag for multiple uses, and therefore they want to invest in something that's going to hold up more so than just show off a certain brand or a certain style. But speaking of investments, our fifth and final finding to share right now is that resale and rental have the potential to dramatically reshape how consumers approach this category. We found that a majority of consumers are interested in participating in the already fast-growing resale and rental markets for designer bags. We found that resale can enable consumers to access a wider range of brands and styles, including some hard-to-find limited editions, at more accessible price points than they can find in the primary market. And it also offers consumers a channel to sell their bags and recoup some, if not all, of the original purchase price. Meanwhile, rental platforms enable consumers to try out trendier bags for shorter periods of time and without a purchase commitment. Now, of course, there are many more findings from our research and analysis that we are not able to cover today, such as some of our key findings on live stream shopping, sustainable materials, mini bags, and even canvas totes, just to name a few. So to dive more into these and all the other findings that we've highlighted today, we invite you to visit our website, shop.businessoffashion.com, to access this full report. Now, without further ado, we'd like to turn it over to our panelists to hear their thoughts on all the dynamics that are shaping this category. So through the little presentation there, we definitely established that bags and small leather goods can be called a hero category for fashion brands. In both your opinions, how has the value of bags to consumers or to fashion companies as a whole changed over the last couple of years? Ian, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. I think actually looking at just the extract of the report, there's a few sort of poignant points that we can relate to at Mulberry. I think no longer are luxury bags inaccessible. I think we used to talk a lot about high net worth individuals and how we targeted them maybe 5-10 years ago, but I think the actual customer base is a lot broader, and a lot of consumers today are using a luxury handbag either as their first luxury purchase or their access into a brand that they want to use as a status symbol. I'd say this is probably the main one. Definitely much more of a broader appeal. We actually launched over during COVID Mulberry Exchange. You may or may not be familiar with that. It's a buyback program for resale. We have a factory and a repair center in Somerset that repairs over 10,000 bags a year. We're using that infrastructure to help restore and put love back into our bags that we repurchase, that we recondition and sell in our stores. It became part of our Made to Last manifesto that we launched over a year ago. And I think we were really overwhelmed by the uptake from the consumer. We weren't quite sure what to expect. We knew that we were trying to get maybe ahead of the game a little bit in terms of experimenting with resale and rental. My biggest challenge in this space at the moment is I can't keep the shelves stocked. The demand for the product is sort of outweighing what I can get back from the consumers. So I think, your report referencing the fact that resale and made to last and, that sort of conscious and more thoughtful purchasing behavior is absolutely already there. And I think brands can do a lot more to sort of control that themselves. I mean, we're at the beginning of our journey. We've got a lot more to learn in terms of that front, but we're certainly seeing that is definitely a big shift. I think they're probably the two big shifts that I'd refer to.
Excellent, and that's great to hear that. It's hard to keep the shelf stocked. Definitely good to have high demand. Richard, what are your takes on just how the category has been evolving, and what the value to bags to consumers and to Mytheresa has been lately?
Sure. Well, look, I think you picked up on clearly on some very important points there. I mean, for us, of course, we're well aware bags have long been a personal style statement, as you noted. In many respects, as a multi-brand retailer, we know that bags are one of the most visible items that consumers can wear, and most visibly branded. I mean, in some cases with the company's logo, but in many cases now just simply in terms of the design of the bag being very identifiable. I think today, consumers, of course, aesthetics and brands are the key driver behind purchasing choices, but there's also a lot of other considerations that the consumers are much more aware of now than perhaps they were in the past. And I think in this respect, it's quite interesting because brand values, what the brand stands for, what the company ethos is, becomes an important integral part of the thought process from a customer point of view, and whether those values indeed align with our personal values, whether that's something that we want to make a statement about ourselves, again, because they're so visible. And that there's many factors that play into that. I think one of the most important maybe in recent years is diversity. Certainly, I mean, consumers need to feel like they can buy into the culture, the ethos, the idea behind the brand, as well as the product itself. I think historically luxury brands have thought in terms of consumers reaching up to meet them, aspiring to be part of the luxury world. But I feel that is now a very dated point of view, and brands need to open up, as Ian said, both in terms of price point, but in terms of ethos, and make the audience feel included. I mean, there are many examples of this. Gucci is well documented as having gone through quite a journey on this front, and through their content, through their marketing, employ a diverse cast of models and personalities and spokespeople to help position their brand. And we've certainly seen a very positive reaction to that work. But it's not just about marketing and content and a perceived image. It's what are the company values? I mean, as a company, how do they behave? And certainly, again, there Gucci have led the way in terms of bringing diversity into the higher tiers of their management and making sure it cascades through the audience, so that their employees, so that the audience can feel like they are part of something worthwhile, that is a genuinely diverse culture, a company culture.
I love both of these points that Richard and Ian, you've brought up, and it really resonates with us, because one thing that we identified in the report as well is that there are these three forces that really expanded the definition of luxury. So namely, those are about accessibility. So there are these new startup brands that have made in Italy and craftsmanship, but just at much more accessible price points. And there's a sustainability as well, which Ian, you've talked about, whether that's through resale and circularity, or also the alternative materials. And the last force is about casualization. So that might be indicative of streetwear, or just sort of not having brands in that ivory tower. So Richard, really what you were saying about people having to reach up to brands, that really isn't the case anymore. So I think that really hits the nail on the head. And I wanted to follow up with you then, Richard, because what you talked about with the brand ethos, that makes a lot of sense for brands. But as a retailer, how would a retailer like Mytheresa really be able to respond to these types of forces that you're seeing? And because I feel like on one hand, it might be easier for brands to be able to communicate this, but retailers, how do you make that stance clear to consumers?
It's a great question. And look, our job is amplification. We're a multi-brand retail environment. We give consumers a platform and environment where they can choose very easily between brands, and they can switch quickly between products and contrast and compare. And from an amplification point of view, our job is to tell these stories, but not just to tell them, but to vet them. So we really understand what's happening within the companies, whether they live and breathe what they're saying, whether they walk the walk. It's not pure marketing. They're not just talking the talk. And then to help do our part to help educate consumers on what's happening and which brands are pushing forward on different levels. And storytelling for us, I mean, in some ways is inherent in what we do. Of course, we exist to sell products. We're a retailer, but what we really are is a storyteller, and communication is a hugely important part of that process. And on the one hand, it's about generating desirability, but on the other, it's very much an educational process, and we see our role in that being extremely important, for sure.
Ian, I wanted to follow up with you, just because there are a lot of factors that are out there that are influencing consumers. And so for a brand like Mulberry, how do you contend with all those differences that are manifesting themselves, but in a way that stays true to that brand DNA?
Yeah, I think it's quite a big challenge because you want to remain relevant and you want to continue to innovate. I think Richard touched on sort of brand values and sort of brand DNA, and I think at the core of any brand there is sort of a purpose of why your brand exists. And I think for us it's about staying on the straight and narrow and making sure that we are staying true to that. I guess the challenge is how do we continue to innovate and bring in new products that customers can engage with, and we can either, whether that's through acquisition or whether it's existing customers, taking them on a journey, making sure that they're remaining loyal with the brand is really, really key. I think some of the ways that we achieve that is we've got a good balance of core iconic silhouettes and shapes that consumers gravitate towards. I'm sure a lot of the audience today will be familiar with those, but I think each season we really push ourselves to sort of drive new creative shapes and silhouettes into the range. For me personally, I think the voices of the regions are really, really important when you're thinking about a global luxury brand. It's getting that feedback from the consumers sort of all in sort of one place, making sure that it makes its way into a brief that the product and design teams can actually get a hold of. And I think it has to stop there, because designing by committee can be a dangerous game. You have to let the designers and the product teams do their jobs and drive innovation and creativity through newness, which effectively is what keeps customers coming back to online or back to the stores.
Okay, thank you for that. And Richard, just because we've been talking about innovation, but would love to hear just your perspective about how Mytheresa thinks about selecting the assortment and being able to feature that gamut from the more established brands, as well as those that are more contemporary, that might also offer freshness to consumers. And so how do you balance that?
Sure. Well, look, we in terms of assortment, we think globally. We have one buying team that covers our entire assortment, and today we ship cross-border from Munich. We don't have currently have local hubs in different parts of the world, but the global thinking is really central to what we do. And you touched on ensuring we have a comprehensive offer. I mean, this is really key. We need to make sure that we have sizes, colors. You talked in your report a little bit about the practicality of bags. Of course, they're not just items of desirability, they serve a function. And we want to serve that offer globally to our complete, our total audience. We are, of course, very aware that there are micro trends within particular regions. In Asia Pacific, we often see a preference for smaller bags, crossbody, top handle, often structured, often in leather, sometimes with embellishment, whereas in the US, bigger bags, hobos and totes, and in softer construction, softer fabrics, suedes, and so on and so forth, tend to be more popular. But I generalize. There are, of course, end uses for all sorts of bags in all regions in the world, and so we put our offer up globally. I think we are entirely focused on the luxury end. We don't go far into the contemporary market. We pride ourselves on being on a luxury retailer, and as I said at the top of the hour, we have the most curated offer of brands and products of all of the major platforms. And it's our role, it's our value add to curate and make sure that we have a very distinctive point of view for customers. We are not a marketplace. We have no intention of showing customers every single option available on the market. We do some legwork. We have a point of view, which any great retailer should have. And that, of course, that kind of focus makes the search for the perfect bag or any perfect item for that matter an easier and more pleasurable process. And of course, we see hundreds of collections every season, and we work very hard to make sure that we focus on only the most most relevant and the most important designers and styles available.
Thank you for mentioning some of those, regional nuances, especially like more trend towards mini bags in China and shoulder bags in the US, which is certainly something that, we have seen in our research. Ian, you mentioned a little bit too about some, regional differences that you tried to then, gather together into one insight for your design team. Would you be able to touch on just a little of the, nuances between different consumer groups, different regions that you see at Mulberry also?
Yeah, quite scarily close to how Richard described it. I think for us, we sort of see ourselves as a day wear business, or have been a day wear, primarily a day wear business. I think in the UK, our core customer, our biggest market would be in our black or oak or oxbloods, in more of the sort of the NVT or the GVT leathers. Definitely in Asia, we would say more structured, smaller. I think functionality plays less a part of the process, the process and the decision making. I think it's important, but I would say it's less so. And I would say that the US is definitely larger, but probably a little bit more embellished than what we see in the UK. What I will say is, when we look at our entire business and we look at what families sell, the silhouette tends to be the same one that sells globally. It's the differences within the silhouette that are different between territory. So if our Alexa or our Bayswater is our number one and our number two, for example, it'll be the smaller version in China. It'll be the more embellished version in the US. And then in the UK, will either be sort of the black or the black or the oak. It's not that the top 5 or top 10 is wildly different. All regions globally at the moment are seeing double-digit growth in mini bags and in small leather goods. I'd say that's a trend that has been happening for some time, and we're not seeing any sort of signs of that slowing down anytime soon, at least within our segment. It's not necessarily at the detriment to larger leather goods either. I think we're seeing a new customer. We're certainly seeing a newer customer come through, especially internationally, and also, I guess, in our home market. Clearly, price plays a part on that. I think is an element, but I think more importantly, what people carry around in their bags is different to maybe what they would carry around. Lifestyle has changed, and therefore people are sort of choosing to go smaller.
Fantastic. That definitely validates some of the findings from our research, especially small leather goods being a great tool for customer acquisition, offering at a little smaller price point. They obviously serve great functionality. So it's fantastic to hear. We'd love to switch gears a little bit, and both of you did mention the role that social media and just e-commerce at large has kind of been playing recently. So through our research, we definitely found that social media has a pretty big impact on consumer shopping journeys. Through our surveys, we found that about 50% of consumers already begin their shopping journey by browsing online, whether that's on social media platforms or on e-commerce sites. And we'd love to hear from the both of you just how the role of social media has changed the way in which not only consumers discover and buy bags, but also how brands and retailers can communicate with them through the platforms. Maybe Richard, would you like to start us off on social media?
Yeah, with pleasure. I think it plays an incredibly important role, and there's really two elements to it. One is the creating desire, getting the audience excited about something, so either something new or recontextualizing a pillar bag. And the other side to the coin is the education element, which we touched on earlier. From a desirability point of view, I would point to Jacquemus. I mean, they've done a fantastic job of really creating super effective content, which is made for, of course, plays really well, perfectly on social media, taking advantage of color and a playful humorous use of scale and the architectural design of the bags themselves. I think what's been super effective there is that he has not only let that live in the digital world, but has brought it into the physical world. So through 24/24 pop-ups in Milan, I think was the first, Paris, and more recently London. brought that kind of eye-catching social media feel to the real world. So customers, of course, can touch and feel like they can in any store, but really experience the energy and the feel of the pop-up spaces themselves, and allowing consumers then, of course, to also to amplify the message and to take the message even further than perhaps they could on their own channel. From an educational point of view, social media is not the only route. It's a good route. It's not the only route. But again, loops back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of talking to customers about brand values, telling the stories, giving maybe heritage context to the designs. I loved what Prada did when they launched their Renylon program, by putting sustainability in their most famous product group at the forefront, and in doing that, creating films with National Geographic, which looked at the natural world across several continents. So kind of brought what they were doing with Renylon into context with the wider world. We recently, on a completely different tip, live streamed on our own Instagram account the men's Saint Laurent show from the desert just outside Marrakesh, which was a fantastic partnership, and we felt important, again, from telling a story about heritage, for perhaps a new generation of Saint Laurent customers who may not be so aware of Yves, the founder's love of that location, of that place, the time he spent there, and the impact it had on his designs, and therefore, bringing the spotlight, using our own channel to, again, amplify this really well, perform best on social media, and their communication is much richer for it.
It feels like, in a way, that a lot of restaurants were trying to make themselves very Instagrammable, and that's really come for store designs as well. So it's not just enough to put your merchandise on store racks. Like, you've really got to think about that engagement and what pops. And so there really is something about bags having to be very eye-catching and attention-grabbing. So Ian, on that point of social media, how does Mulberry think about designing for a social media age?
Yeah, I think it's imperative. I sort of touched on, someone touched on earlier, is that it's an access to the brand's world. There's several different channels and access points that consumers find themselves using today. I think we when we look at social, we don't just try to look at telling story through the lens of a product. We can lean on craftsmen, and we can lean on whether it's a story around our manifesto, whether it's something about our heritage or our history. I think you have to be broad on how you use and how you access those channels. I also think as well that the content that you produce needs to be, it's not uniform across all of the social platforms. I think there was a stat that I heard that 50% of TikTok users don't have Facebook or Instagram accounts, which sort of tells you that the demographic is wildly different. So what you put on one channel has to be very different to what you put on another. I think some allow you to have a little bit more fun, some might be a little bit more serious, some might be a little bit more about the product. So I think it's about understanding the customer who uses those platforms and actually trying to really target them with the message that you want to receive. I think brands are behaving more and more like publishing houses. They've got this sort of endless aisle of content that they have to produce and keep on sort of churning out to be able to keep up. And obviously social is at the very forefront of that. But yeah, it's extremely powerful when it's used right. I think the engagement for us is really high. It's an integral part of our strategy, and I'd imagine will be for the future as well. I think the one thing I think brands potentially need to be careful of is what is maybe necessarily relevant today. That I think what we've seen over the last 10 years is how quick social can change. There's probably been a number one leader, probably changed hands once or maybe twice in the last 10 years. And I think we're probably going to see another shift with the emergence of TikTok in the next 5 to 10 years. Is actually how do you get the right spend on the right channel, whilst you're balancing your existing customer base, whilst you're also trying to maybe attract acquire a new customer.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense, because social media clearly has a lot of opportunities in terms of connecting with your consumers in new and in different ways. But there is that dark side that you just alluded to about the content churn and just how volatile and how whimsical and mercurial that stage can be, because what can be a hit one day, you don't know if that's going to fall out of favor the next. And so a bit of a provocative question, but does the concept of an Iit bag even exist anymore? Because I think back in the 90s, early 2000s, you could say that a lot of countries had like a monoculture, but then with the advent of something like social media, there's so much splintering in consumer groups, and there's a lot of alternatives. There is just so much product proliferation. So how do you think about, does the concept of an Iit bag exist, or is this just simultaneously there can be many Iit bags? Ian, why don't we start with you? And then I feel like I saw Richard nodding, so I want him to get in on this conversation as well.
I think, is there an easy way to answer this? I think if there is, I think if the recipe for an Iit bag was really sort of straightforward, everybody would be doing it. I think in a previous conversation with yourself, we discussed about Mulberry's history and sort of where we came off back in the early noughties, where we'd had success with Alexa. At that point in time, we had Alexa and another family were probably generating close to 80% of the business's turnover. I think the concept of an Iit bag is a really, really interesting one. I'd much prefer from my desk to be able to have several families that are delivering between 10 and 20% of my overall business. It's a lot more sustainable that way for me, because I can play to the different nuances in the different regions. I can play on functionality a lot more. I'm sure there's bags that still are classified today in terms of Iit bag. I actually don't even know if there's a shared definition of what an Iit bag is today. Is it on volume? Is it on reach? Is it on who carries it? I think there's so many different ways that you can come at it. I think the market today it's really, really fierce. It's I don't think it's ever been as competitive as it is today. So potentially there's an element of dilution there. I definitely think it's getting polarized. I think some of the bigger brands are getting bigger, and everybody's sort of running to catch up. The bar seems every year to get higher and higher, and the expectation on brands to sort of deliver more newness to consumers and with this content is more and more evident. I think bags that maybe 10, 15 years ago were defined as Iit bags might have had a little bit more time to sort of settle in and get sort of get a history of sales under their belt before they took off. I don't think any of those bags sort of hit, unless they were hyped, sort of were launched and flew off the shelves. Not in our case anyways. So I think there's maybe a little bit more impatience around the performance of bags today. I think there's a lot of pressure on, even when we launch a new product on after day one, how is it performed? After week one, how is it performed? And I think the ones that perform, the bags and the families that perform really well, it's very easy to get behind. And the ones that don't, sometimes you don't have the luxury of time on your side. You have to move on, because you've only got so many square feet in the store and so much content, as to your point, that can be churned out. You can't possibly support everything. So I think it's probably a little bit it's probably mostly diluted a little bit. Yeah, but maybe I'm to be proven wrong.
Well, Richard, would love to hear you build off of that and what Ewan was just saying about you can't stock everything. So what does that mean for a retailer? So, what does an Iit bag mean for Mytheresa? How do you chase after Iit bags, if that is even a concept that's worth striving for?
Yeah, well, look, the problem with this question is it exposes my age. I mean, I was around in the 90s and certainly in the noughties. So I remember this. I remember this well. It's not just a nostalgia trip. I agree. I agree with what Ian said. I mean, and someone in the chat I just saw pop up said it used to be a status symbol, and that's exactly what an Iit bag was. I mean, it was a time when I think a lot of consumers at that point chased a very specific bag from a very specific designer, and it kind of was emblematic of the moment. And since then, there has been, there's huge proliferation in the market. There's far more options available today than there were then. Bags is a much bigger, luxury bags are a much bigger business. And I think also the price point of the true Iit bags has grown exponentially in the last 20 years. So what may have been accessible then at a stretch, is even more expensive now. the desire that drove that for sure still exists. The want to carry the right status symbol on your arm is still alive and well. But there's polarization now. When we see in Mytheresa is that at the one end, we have strong sales in opening price points. So merchandising within the brand studios have actively encouraged the opening price point, which I think Ian talked a little bit about earlier, the democratization of bags as an accessible way into a brand, which maybe at that point was more the territory of beauty or of fragrance as the access point. But then at the other end, you've got the extreme examples. I mean, maybe Hermes Birkin is the most potent example, where scarcity is ensured. The price points are so high to the point where some people actually consider them an asset class, an investable item, which is an incredible concept for a fashion item. And we look at obviously in the resale market to understand the longevity of all of that. So polarization is what we see at Mytheresa: entry price and then the high end being for the really iconic styles that with historical resonance.
That's fantastic to hear you mention those connections with the resale market. As we've certainly seen that with some of these Y2K trends and seeing some of the Iit bags from the 90s now coming back, and the resale market is the only way to actually access some of those bags, at least at a price point that is accessible. I'd love to hear from both of you about your takes on how your business is approaching the resale market and how it is reshaping the category, especially speaking to this concept of seeing bags as an investable asset. Just a pretty incredible concept and very new thing. Ian, would you mind first taking us? I know you mentioned a little bit at the beginning about Mulberry Exchange. Could you dive a little deeper into your work there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the resale market today is primarily owned in the marketplace space. I think you would agree with that. I think as a brand, I think most brands would agree if they're going to do something, they'd like to own the process. And quite early on, when we were having discussions about what resale could look like, and if we were really, when we were pulling together our manifesto, and one of the pillars of our manifesto is circularity, and I think we knew at that point we had to be serious about offering that. I mean, we never put product in landfill previously anyways, and we'd always had for the last 50 years a repair center that sort of had the DNA of this sort of ideology in it before sustainability was even trending. So I think for us, it's always been at the heart of what we do. And I think the Mulberry Exchange and Resale is just an extension of that. I think for us, what's really, really key is that in resale, there's the hot topic is authenticity. Is the product that you're taking authentic? And we believe as the brand that the only people who can do that successfully are the brand. It was made in our factories by our craft people, and therefore, for us to be able to have a resale platform or a resale offering, the bags would have to come back to ourselves. So once we'd got to that step, the rest actually came quite naturally. So we know that in the UK was our biggest market. There were hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of bags out in the market that some were probably being used and loved, and some maybe not. I said before, we get 10,000 bags back a year through our repair center. Some bags may be worth repairing, some not. Some customers have sentimental value to those products, and others just need the functionality and the use of a bag. So we started to play around with the idea of a buyback scheme. We held events in London just before COVID in some of our flagship locations. They were received extremely well, where consumers brought in bags. We valued them, authenticated them, sent them to our repair center. Then they go through a process of whether they can be repaired or not. If they can't be repaired, interestingly, we actually strip the bag of all of its parts, take away the hardware, break the bag back down, and then there's a company called the Scottish Leather Group that the sort of off trimmings and the leather of the bulk of that bag goes to the Scottish Leather Group, where it's then incinerated and turned into steam. So it actually powers the factory that they use to produce more leather. And I think they're one of the biggest suppliers of for the automotive industry in Europe. So actually that completes the circle if we can't repair the product. If we can repair the product, then obviously it's given the, a lot of TLC, whether it's the inking, whether it's the gusset, whether it's new thread, new hardware, new zips, linings. It's given a clean, potentially reshaped, repolished if need be, even recolored if it's really stained or damaged. It's quite remarkable what the team in Somerset can do. And then the product goes back out to be sold. Obviously, it's authenticated, and customers who are buying from our platforms and our channels, that assumption is already there. I think the next step for us in our phase and we announced it about 2 or 3 weeks ago, would be to digitalize with a chip with a business called Eon, the whole provenance piece around resale. So actually the product itself has an authentication which is done in the form of somebody has a mobile phone through NFT technology. They can actually read the chip and understand where was the bag made, has it been repaired, was it returned? And this for us is really the next step in owning that sort of D2C, if you like, part of the resale element. We're continuing to explore other avenues. We recently launched with her a rental service that was, it started about 4 weeks ago. We couldn't get the economics of rental to stack up doing it ourselves. And so we wanted to go with the leaders in the UK market. So we're actually at a conference together, and we got asked a question, and from there sort of that relationship flourished, and we launched a couple of weeks ago. So that's quite exciting as well. I think we're continuing to push the boundaries. Like I said earlier, our biggest challenge is stock and supply. So I think as much as the products we can get back off the consumers today, it's actually a double-edged strategy for us, because we've got consumers who are bringing products back to our store who get a credit. Who are spending the credit on the day. They're usually spending more than what they receive on the credit, sometimes 2 or 3 times the amount of what happens on the credit. So we're actually using it as a way to re-engage with customers who maybe not have been in the store for a period of time. Where then obviously the sustainable angle is I think is clear and obvious. And who knows, in the future, maybe there's a long-term rental scheme. I said before, we've got about 50% of our business is core, and the other 50% is seasonal. It could be that consumers can, it's almost pay a subscription, or could rent a product for a seasonal period, and then it can sort of rotate. It can rotate back through the exchange process once the consumers finish that cycle.
And Richard, can you tell us a little bit about Mytheresa's experiments with resale? So I think last year you had launched a trial with Vestia Collective. So it would be really interesting to hear about how that works and kind of what are possible plans in the future for expanding that, if any.
Yes, exactly that. I mean, circularity is very important to us. Of course, we ship many units of bags and other luxury products every year, and it's important that we are part of the solution, not part of the problem. Luxury, I mean, Mulberry, listening to Ian talk, they're clearly taking a lot of steps on this front. I think the luxury industry overall has a lot of catching up to do. There's a lot of work to be done on this front, but we're in a good position to do it, because exactly for the reasons Ian explained, the quality of the materials, the craftsmanship, the construction, there's no reason at all why these items shouldn't have a second or third life, given some care, given some restoration. And so with that, as you said, Diana, we launched a pilot last year with Vestia Collective, which was super successful. We started with bags, in fact, as a category for obvious reasons, and it allowed. We started with a smaller customer group of our regular customers to understand how it would work, and it allowed us to encourage and work with our regular customers to free up space in their wardrobe. We don't want to be in a position where best customers, particularly high net worth, are essentially stockpiling items which are not being used. I mean, these items, these bags need to have a life. They need to be used, and on this basis, they're able to send their items that they bought through us or otherwise directly to Vestia, and Vestia do the legwork for them. So they're not actually having to go through the sale process themselves. Vestia, of course, vet it, but these are our regular spending customers, so that the quality of the product is to a very high degree beyond dispute. And the uptake was fantastic. The response on an ethical level from customers was, it's fantastic you're doing this. It helps me personally, but also, helps deal with the burden of some guilt that we're spending all of this money on items. And let's be honest, we don't sell things people need. We sell things people desire, and makes it even more important that that items are given a second life. And it's a similar concept to Mulberry. We get a credit note back that you can use on site, and the pickup from that also from a commercial standpoint, although this wasn't the primary driver at all, was to re-engage with customers, was to give them the chance to come back on site and use that as a reward to put towards a future purchase. And customers have enjoyed it on many levels. So it's been a great success. For the future, we're rolling that out through categories. We would like to extend that to more customers and understand how that will work. And it's really a step-by-step approach.
So we had a lot of audience questions on resale, and I say that the second most popular type of question that we've gotten from the audience is similarly related to sustainability and ethics. And so it is about alternative materials and biomaterials. And so would love to have either one or both of you take a crack at responding to, can a non-leather material be considered luxurious for a designer bag? And where do we see that future going? Richard, maybe we continue with you.
Sure, pleasure. Look, alternative materials in my mind, in our mind, is without question the future. I mean, it's not so long ago that fur and exotic skins were generally considered acceptable particularly within bags, also within shoes, of course, and as trims on ready to wear. And consumer sentiment has changed dramatically in a relatively short space of time, and rightly so. Today, of course, there's still an allure around leather. And from a sustainability point of view, if indeed it is a byproduct of other things, that it's certainly in a better position than fur or exotics ever was. But consumer sentiment now, I think, drives brand sentiment as much as the other way around. And this is a really important shift. Before, it would have been, the question would have been, can a designer convince their audience of the worthiness of the luxurious qualities of these materials? It's not an entirely new conversation. I mean, Stella McCartney's been having great success in bags for a long time using non-leather materials, and the technology which is now being developed to produce skins, so to speak, which more closely resemble or replicate leather, if that is indeed the future important, will only allow that space to expand. And I think, again, consumer sentiment will drive that. We're starting to see small experimentation outside of Stella and one or two others at this stage, but we expect it to really gather speed quite quickly, and for sure we will be supporting that.
Ian, anything that you would like to add?
I think just a couple of small points. I think to put leather aside for just a moment, I'll come back to that material. But all of the other materials that we use, whether it's cotton or e-nylon, Scotch grain, are all now sustainable materials. So whether they're being reclaimed from ocean plastic, or it's organic cotton, or so that part of, I guess, the process has been looked at. The vast majority of what we do today is leather, and I think there's no escaping that. 90% of our business is leather goods, whether it's small leather goods or large leather goods. This is a question that we get asked a lot, and I think it's something that we look at. I think leather, Richard's right, is a byproduct of another industry. I would say, I think the next part for us is actually looking at the tanning process and the sourcing and the supply chain of how, and the traceability of leather. And this is something that we've also made steps and pledges in our Made to Last manifesto. So over 40% of our leathers come from, well, actually, 100% of our leathers come from gold standard accredited tanneries. I think first, so these are tanneries that meet accreditation by an independent party. And over 40% of our leathers come from a tannery which is in Germany that sources its hides from Denmark. And this tannery for us is really the epitome of sustainable manufacturing and sustainable tannery. So I think for tanning process. So for us, I think it's about looking at the supply chain process, looking at the tanning process, looking how we as a brand manufacture and make our goods to the highest possible standard with transparency for our customers. And I think this is really, really key. We have in our manifesto a hyper local. Sorry, I was not prepared for the exact question, but there's a regenerative agriculture is the word that I was looking for. Apologies. So we launched a very small capsule at the last year, which was done again with the Scottish Leather Group, who I mentioned earlier, which is around regenerative farming. This whole idea that the movement of the cattle across the land actually helps and allows to release and store carbon in the ground. So I think there's a lot about leather that consumers may or may not know. And there's actually a lot of benefits to the environment than there is hindrances. And I think that brands, again, like I said, need to be more transparent around their supply chains and actually educate their consumers why leather is a great material to use.
I mean, this is brilliant. It really goes to show the future of the category and how it will continue to evolve. So we have very little time left, but I did want to leave off with one slightly modified audience question, which is about just given how competitive and how saturated the landscape is, the guest has actually asked about opportunities for white spaces. So I wanted to ask both Richard and Ian just kind of concluding thoughts about where are those white spaces, or the other way to interpret and answer this question is just to think about, how does a brand and how does a retailer continue to stand out in the midst of all this competition? So I'd love to leave off with the final thoughts here. Ian, perhaps we'll continue with you.
Yeah, well, it's a great question. I think we potentially touched on it a little bit earlier as well. I think for us, there is plenty of opportunity in a white space. I think for us, we see us moving into that around, I think the thing we spent most of the time talking about today, which is sustainability. And I think for us, that's something we're really putting our energy behind and trying to maximize our efforts there. I think it's important for a brand to stay really, really true to their core values and their DNA when communicating to their customer. I think brands that potentially dilute their message over a period of time can find not only losing market share, but can lose relevance. So for us, it's about having a lot of focus on what our 3-year plan is. How do we stay true to that 3-year plan and how do we acquire new customers along that journey? And that just applies not just to a distribution plan, but a strategy around product, which links into marketing, which links into supply chain. And I think I probably missed out on one of my answers earlier on was a really, really key word, and that's relevant today is around agility. And I think having either an agile supply chain or the agility to be able to pivot and make decisions if consumer behaviors change quick enough is really, really key.
Thank you for that. Richard, any quick concluding thoughts about those white spaces or how to continue to differentiate yourself?
Yeah, I mean, it is. Look, it is a very crowded market. There's a dizzying amount of choice. It's certainly saturated from a product point of view, and in context of that, certainly from a retailer point of view, also I believe from a brand design point of view, is the only route to success is focus and more focus. It's always tempting to bring new ideas forward as rapidly as possible and feed that seemingly insatiable demand, but this is a mistake. I mean, real value is created when designers invest a lot of time in the construction and the quality and the design of the product and think about end users. And the same goes for retailers in terms of the choices they make in the products that we put forwards. I think in luxury, those big instant hits, the touching again on the Iit bag idea, that it's a drug, but the highs are often very short-lived, and it's very hard to replicate that kind of success, and it certainly can't be done sustainably. So I think white space really comes from investing time and money in ideas that you believe in, and giving them the support that they deserve in order to breathe.
That's fabulous. And I hope everybody was taking notes on these very important practical and tactical and strategic points that our guest panelists made today. So we are now at time. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Ian. This has been an absolute pleasure. We learned so much, even after having done all of the research ourselves, that there continue to be these new nuggets of wisdom. So we greatly appreciate your time and your perspectives. Big thank you to the BoF team. And of course, big thank you to our audience members for tuning in. Thank you so much for your brilliant questions, and please stay tuned to the rest of our calendar for this year. And again, if you're interested in learning more about this very fascinating topic, I hope you will visit our site at shop.businessoffashion.com. Thank you, everyone, and until next time, bye-bye.